Good evening, all. We got some gnarly audio going here. Scott, you're early.
I just got out of my other meeting, Steve, so it worked out perfectly.
Fortune favors the prepared mind.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Ashley.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Scott, did you take a look at those maps? They look pretty good.
I haven't looked at them yet, but I'm interested. Scott, have you seen those maps from John Cole?
Not the ones Ashley sent. You're talking about something different, right?
Oh, no, the ones that I sent.
Yeah, no, I think those are really interesting, Ashley. Thank you so much. I just took a very quick look, but I'm looking forward to digging in again.
All right. Oh, he also said he has other materials. So anything you can think of, please reach out to me, or maybe we should get on a call with him next week. And you can ask him what he has. He said he had a wealth of information.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Get my video started. Good evening, Joe. There we go. So you may wonder what this image is.
Yep.
Yes, please fill us in.
Yeah, it's an image I use when I attend a meeting where, you know, there's no right answer. And there may only be really bad answers. So that is not, it wasn't for this meeting. It's a leftover from meeting with some other folks about the environmental waivers requested by the 40B applicant. So I think I can get rid of it. There, that's better. Sorry, no, it isn't better. That's better. Hello, Peter. Hello, Ann. Hello, Ron. Fred.
Hello, Steve.
Thanks for coming.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, Steve. How's the new house?
Well, we have still too much stuff and too little space. But if that's the worst problem you have, I guess you're okay. At least that's what I keep telling myself when there's too much stuff around, but I can't find anything I need. The moral of the story is when you move, make sure that the place you're moving into is actually empty.
Well, wasn't it?
No, we already had furnished this whole space as an office and a studio, and
Huh?
so we have two of lots of things and can't find either of them. Let's talk about something else.
Well, if it's any consolation, Steve, I don't know about your wife, but we had the same problem, and I still have two of everything I need.
But you can probably
Some
find
fights
them.
just aren't worth fighting, you know?
No, no, it's better to know when you're defeated. When to hold them, when to fold them. So maybe my clock is slow, but everyone's prompt today. Let's get started. Welcome to the June 15th meeting of the Water Resources Protection Task Force. under the authority of the Select Board. We welcome our members and guests. And we begin with announcements, of which I'm not sure I have any. Sue, do you have any announcements?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay, I see you're busy being the co-host. Thank you. Anybody else have anything that share before we get going? All right, then let's begin with our first agenda item, which is to discuss the recommendations that the Board of Health is reviewing for new regulations related to water quality. And I just want to preface this by saying that this is complicated stuff, and the Board of Health owns the task of sorting through the complexity, I think. And what I think we can do to help them is to give them a set of suggestions. Many of you have already done this by email, but there's another opportunity in tonight's discussion. And if people agree, also a sense of our group that this is the right direction to head in or not. And we could have a productive debate about that, I think. So, Peter, do you mind if I open up with you, reminding us where things stand and what the Board of Health would like from the task force?
Certainly, be my pleasure. We received this proposal from the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust in October. We were asked to review it and adopt it. We decided that wisely that this committee had a lot more knowledge and expertise in this area than the board members did. So we tabled the discussion pending input from this committee. We would like confirmation that the proposals are technically sound and they will address the needs that they're targeted for. It is not meant to be all-inclusive. It's not meant to be the panacea. It's meant to be one tool out of hopefully many more to come. And it would be amended if necessary as we go along. I believe, was it 4 or 5 years ago, there was an amendment to the septic rules asking the Board of Health to focus on areas that are environmentally sensitive. So amendments are fine. We welcome any input. And then we would vote on, with just some procedural issues that the Board of Health would need to address, and operational and implementation issues. We would then go through, the various officials in town, get consensus before we held a public meeting, go through all the proper steps to adopt it. So that's kind of where we're at. And again, we are limited to only issues that affect health. So we have no input on expanding overlays. That has nothing to do with us. If you want to do that, great. But we have no input on that. Our input is only on health, personal health and environmental health issues. So that's what we'd ask you for advice on.
Good, well put. So who has suggestions? I can kind of start the ball rolling by reviewing a couple of things that I have seen in emails, one of which was the suggestion that the penalty, the daily fine that's contained in these regulations might be low. I think it's set at $300 a day.
I think that the board members that I've spoken to, casually, so perfectly agree that it's way too low. We're starting to look into some Massachusetts regulations. There is a Massachusetts regulation with a $25,000 fine and up to 2 years in jail. I don't know the details on who you have to kill to fall under that, or how we would push an issue to that level. but it certainly could be a tiered situation where we have a daily fine up to a point, at which point we kick it to the state or so. That is under development. That needs to be improved. Certainly would ask any help or input that anybody has on doing that, because $300 a day is coffee break money for some of these major projects.
I don't even think it says per day on there, does it?
No, it just says 300, which is even worse.
Okay, so that's a good example of something the Board of Health can improve. Another in my book was the emphasis in the description of standards and processes for the environmental form. The emphasis is on large-scale private septic systems. And I thought that was well written and well detailed. But there's a second trigger for that requiring that form, which is earth removal or blasting or drilling above a certain level. And that didn't receive, I thought that could use more elaboration, description of process and performance standards.
That we would welcome any input and help us to flush that out. We would certainly welcome any help in that regard.
I was afraid you were going to ask. Others?
I agree with Chuck that I don't know of the rush, but maybe there is some more rush that is an issue. But it seems to me that one of our groups should take this as a document to improve and keep coming back to this group and then make it better in over a month's time.
Other people agree, disagree?
I agree.
Any worries that we might be, since we're not a body that can actually enact anything, we might be letting our quest for the perfect interfere with the good?
I have a quick question. Is there any benefit to having this get into place sooner, given some of the development pressures in town?
My understanding is that from a health perspective, there may be more requirements on developers going forward, particularly where they haven't broken ground yet, that would require them to protect not only existing, but potentially future water sources. And that is backed all the way up to the federal level. And that's until the Supreme Court takes away the Clean Water Act next year. So there is that time limit.
Okay, so okay, it sounds like then I would like to focus on this as a nearer term project rather than putting it off.
I mean, I don't know any advantage. You can always amend it. We do this routinely with our policies. So my concern would be that it keeps getting kicked down the road until you run out of the road. Having something in place is better than having nothing. And if you want to amend it in 2 months, fine. We'll amend it in 2 months. We'll add amendments to it. And having overlapping jurisdictions is fine. We do this all the time with septic systems. The first question we ask is, this is a Concom situation, what did they say? And if they haven't had the hearing yet, we won't even consider the variances they're asking for. So there are overlapping jurisdictions all the time and have been for years. You can't have too many safeguards in my opinion. The more eyes on this type of stuff, the better. It's easier to prevent contamination than to correct it.
Thank you, Peter. I see two hands up. I'll take Sue first and Ann second.
Thanks, Steve. I am of the opinion that you put forth that I think it's better to wait until the facts are in and we've had a chance to look at it. As you know, the zoning regulations do have a water resource protection overlay district, which I think Mr. Horsley's firm helped us produce fairly directly after their study was done. I'd just like to know what's the difference, what is it lacking? Maybe we update that. I think some may see this as maybe a way to get away from the town meeting vote that a change to zoning would take and just go directly through the Board of Selectmen. And I just wonder if that's the wisest route to take. So I would love Mr. Horsley to kind of walk us through what are the differences, what do we need to do to update the zoning to make it most appropriate for this. And I do think that will take some time, and I do think the town should vote on it. So thanks.
Can I respond, please? This has nothing to do with zoning or overlays. These regulations purely are on contamination. So either you aren't concerned about water contamination, or you are. And it doesn't matter, zoning doesn't matter, any of that stuff. That's all we have jurisdiction over is, this is polluted water, you gotta clean it. Or your action will pollute this water, you can't do that. We have no control over zoning, we have no control over overlays. It has nothing to do with this proposal.
Understood.
So there's no other facts for you to gather.
Peter, I don't want to put you in the position of the sole person defending this. So let's hear from Ann and then John round and then Scott, please.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I'm not defending it. I agree with Steve's original comment that the blasting issue doesn't get much coverage, and it's not. I would like someone to explain to me why blasting or soil removal per se is likely to contaminate the watershed.
I think maybe we could ask Scott for a general review of that, the theories behind that, but let's have John first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Like probably, maybe not all of us on the board here, but certainly a number. There's a lot of technology in this document, and especially, and also in the zoning law, which I then subsequently looked at, and I'm trying to compare the two. And the zoning bylaw, in terms of special permits, does require an analysis, a hydrogeologic analysis. And there's a lot of stuff in the drinking water protection regulation that deals with hydrogeologic analysis and various cutoffs, a lot of different stuff in there. I would like to know if under the zoning, if such a report needs to be submitted, what are the standard things that go into that? In other words, how much of this drinking water protection regulation is in fact stuff that any hydrogeologic analysis would include? Is this quite additive to what a standard evaluation would do, or is it not? We need some perspective. I think Scott can probably provide some perspective on that to let us know, because someone who's not familiar with this, we read this document and it hits us, oh, geez, there's so much stuff in here. And I don't know how much of this is a little bit more restrictive or stuff that normally isn't done. So I need a comment on that. With regard to this document and the zoning bylaw, I think they're kind of complementary. The protection regulation really deals with analysis and the hydrogeology and various contaminants, et cetera. The zoning bylaw largely deals with uses. And it only has a one-liner with regard to analysis, which would go back to this particular document that the MECT has submitted. Another thing for perspective that I would like to know is the MEC to put this thing together, and I can't believe it just came out of the air. There have to be other communities, and not far from us, that have similar sorts of documents and similar sorts of questions that they require developers to answer. I mean, I saw on this, the comment, it doesn't apply to single family lots, and I understand that. It seems to me that to do an analysis like this would be quite expensive and would create some real problems if single family lots were involved. But anything beyond that, of course, it does have an application. But I would like to know, and I don't know that there's anyone on this panel that can say, yes, this kind of regulation is in effect in a number of other communities, regardless of how strict it might or might not be, but the regulation does exist there. So these are some of the questions and comments that I've got from all of this reading that we've all done.
Thank you for the good questions, Ann and John. Scott, it seems to me we've got a question about why earth removal or blasting or drilling could create contaminants. We've got this question about counterparts to this under the heading of the Board of Health in other cities or towns. And then we have the question of analysis, hydrological, hydrological. Can you shed light on some of those?
Sure, I can throw a couple things in here, and I think the discussion and questions being asked are quite good. So I'm happy to be part of this. I should start with a disclosure. I believe the regulation we're considering was drafted by Dan Hill, an attorney working for MECT, and he did ask me to look at this last fall. So I have had some input into it, and although I have not looked at it recently, the last week I've been straight out, so I have not reviewed any more recent drafts, but I'd be happy to, and I'm available to do that soon. But having said that, I want to first of all agree with a couple things John just said. I agree. I view this as complementary to the zoning. Some people say, well, if you have it in the zoning, why do you need it in the health, or vice versa? And I think there's really good answers to that. Generally speaking, zoning only affects future land uses, whereas health regulations can apply to existing land uses, is one distinction. But I think it does make sense to have it as a health regulation as well as zoning. On the question of, I'm just looking at some of my notes here, the blasting and soil removal. Blasting is an interesting question. We've dealt with this in a number of projects. Clearly, it can change the fracture network in bedrock. And in your neck of the woods, there's a lot of flow through fractured bedrock. So by blasting a site, it can certainly open up and change those fractures and change flow directions and flow rates. So that's certainly an impact that could or should be considered. In terms of the soil removal, one key factor that I think is pretty widely agreed to in terms of protecting groundwater is depth of groundwater, because the soil overlying it provides some filtration and protection. So as you reduce that thickness, I'm trying to get on the screen here, by excavating, in fact, some towns say you can't get closer than 4 feet or some other number. So I think both of those are valid concerns to have in there. I think there's good scientific basis for on both blasting and soil removal in terms of making a site more vulnerable. And I guess the last thing I would add is I've actually served as an expert witness several times defending Board of Health regulations, and I honestly can say we've never lost. And the reason I say that is not because I'm a great expert witness, but Board of Health regulations, I think really more separate from other local regulations, are very defensible. And it has to do, in my belief, because of the enabling legislation. Chapter 111, Section 31 provides broad powers to the Board of Health. So if there's ever somebody wants to challenge it, they're going to have a hard time. So I think from that regard, it makes sense. So I think I'll stop there, Steve. I mean, I could say a lot more, but I'll stop there for now.
Those are helpful. Randy, then Ashley. Randy, you want to unmute?
Yes, I just unmuted myself. So I think that, there are a lot of towns that have some similar situations to us and that already have, these regulations in place and the aquifer protection overlays. There is someone in the Massachusetts DEP drinking water program that is basically assigned to review and approve aquifer protection districts and Board of Health regulations associated with protecting, aquifers. I think contacting that person might be helpful and having them review it. They review this for many towns and work with the towns to, develop these regulations.
Good suggestion. And you can provide us with that.
Yeah, a name of a person. And
thanks. Ashley, speak up.
Hi, just wanted to bring up one thought which relates to some earlier comments by Fred about the Cape Ann granite. And then I thought, and maybe someone else on the call would recall, I thought there was some issue many, many years ago out in Eagle Head where there was some blasting that ended up contaminating wells. And I wondered if these were considerations which would make us more eager to get these regulations in place.
Is anyone aware of that history? Well, if as a group we don't remember it, it may be rumor. Well, this has been a good discussion. I hope useful, Peter, to take back to Board of Health. I'm wondering if the sentiment here is to simply send along these and any other suggestions that we have, or to have at least a sense of the meeting vote on whether we as a group endorse the Board of Health proceeding in this direction, or whether we would like them to keep the brakes on, so to speak, while we continue our work. What do others think?
And if you decide to wait for additional information, it would be helpful if you could tell me what that information is as it relates to health issues, because that's all we're talking about here.
Yes, well, that's a concern of all of us, but really it's the bailiwick of the team on contaminants and quality. And having attended their last meeting, which was very useful, I don't think they've been looking in the direction of advising the Board of Health. They've been looking more generally at fact-finding about existing and emerging contaminants. Is that fair, Gordon? That our team wouldn't at this point have it?
Yeah, that's what our focus has been. But can you, I was a few minutes late joining in. Can you remind me what the next steps would be if tonight we said we're interested in having the Board of Health pursue this? What does the Board of Health need to do next in that process?
Well, as Peter said, the Board of Health has a number of suggestions from us, and I assume from others, that they need to incorporate into and see if they can refine or expand, elaborate some of the draft regulations. Then I believe they want to have a public meeting to air this.
Well, actually, Steve, I would like to send it to that individual that Randy had recommended first.
Ah, yes, the DEP expert.
Yeah, and then get their comments and then present it to the town officials and then go to public meetings. If I was not aware of that individual's availability.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for that.
All right, thank you.
So that would be the process. And then I believe that it's by vote of the Board of Health, they can adopt these regulations without going to town meeting or select board approval. Obviously they'll listen to suggestions and criticisms from any quarter.
And just to sort of circle back to some of Chuck's concerns that he sent by email and some of the other things that have been raised, you know, what is the work that this group is going to be doing over the next 18 months that might impact any of this, Peter? I mean, Peter, you're very familiar with this document. Obviously, you've been very close to it. So what types of things might change based on what this group is doing? You know, a new report from Scott Horsley about the water flow through the Cedar Swamp and things like that. Might we change some of these overlay districts and things, but these are just references in your...
That has nothing to do with the quality of the water. So that would be beyond our scope.
Okay.
We only have the authority to implement policies that may contaminate water, prevent it or correct it. That's it.
Yeah.
So all of these other Scott studies, that's great. You know, but it has nothing to do with this regulation.
And I guess one more question, and then I'll let other people ask questions. It seemed to me like the bulk of the concrete things in this were about depth to groundwater and distance and things like that. Does this, as written, rely a lot on the Board of Health interpreting reports that are given to it and making decisions, or should there be additional sort of concrete guidelines that have to be met in terms of, like, how are you guys going to interpret these hydrological reports, and do we need more specific kind of things in this guide?
My understanding is that most of these tests have state requirements and state parameters. Nobody on the board is qualified, quite frankly, and we'll do exactly what we do with the septic, is we hire an outside firm, an engineering firm, to review the plans, review the law, come back and make a recommendation. They recommend that we approve it. They recommend these adjustments have to be made, and we basically follow their recommendations, to be honest with you.
Okay. And this is just requiring the developers then fund those studies and get that done. And yeah.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you.
Sue, you've been patient. Is your hand still up for that?
It is. Thank you. I just had a kind of a foundational question, if you will. This is about protecting groundwater. And given it's about protecting water, I wonder why there's an exemption and why some single family would be allowed and not required to why they would be an exemption when others wouldn't. So multifamily would be not exempt, but single family would be exempt, when it could have the same impact on the water. So I'm just curious as to why that would be the case. If the goal is to protect water, why would there be an exemption for some land uses?
Scott, can you take that one?
Well, a single family is often exempted from these types of regulations, partly because of the burden of a study like this, as I think you may have mentioned before, Peter, or somebody. And then secondly, the impacts are clearly more likely to be more significant with a larger project. I mean, there's more area that gets disrupted. There's typically more wastewater. So for these types of, I understand there's a lot of Board of Health regs that do regulate single family homes, like septic regs, of course. Mm-hmm. But for a study like this, most of the towns, and one thing I didn't say before, by the way, is I am familiar with a number of communities that do have a similar regulation. So this is not out of the mainstream at all. And I think those communities are happy they have the regulation in place, because it gives them a chance to ask the developer for more information. But I think that it is common to exempt the single family home from a regulation of this nature. And I would agree with that, because I think that again, just as a matter of scale, what we're trying to do here is require this type of analysis on a larger project.
Yeah. So were you thinking of the rare case?
Go ahead.
Were you thinking of the rare case where a single family home might in fact have a fairly high output?
Yeah, so I wonder if a performance standard might be a better qualifier than whether it's a multifamily or a commercial, because clearly there are single family residences in Manchester that have a greater impact on the environment than a single business or even a small multifamily might have. So I just wonder if maybe it might be more qualitative rather than.
Steve, if I may jump in on that, I think that's a really good suggestion, Sue, because Manchester is a little bit unique that way. And there's plenty of precedent for having the exemption be an aerial sort of thing rather. I mean, EPA uses 1 acre for some of their stormwater regulations, for example, and doesn't distinguish whether that's a single family home or something larger. So I think that's a really good suggestion. And you might just pick an area of disruption, whether it be a 1/4 of an acre, 10,000 square feet, half an acre, whatever you pick. But really, I think that's a good thought. You might have a huge single family home project that is blasting a lot of rock in a water supply area that might be worth reviewing. So I think that's an excellent suggestion.
I believe that we put in an amendment, and you may not have the latest version, but as luck would have it, the Board of Health got a plan for 21-room house. So we put in a provider that any single family home under 70 over 7,500 square feet falls within these regulations. Now, maybe that's an insufficient number. Maybe it needs to be lower. That's fine. If you folks feel that way, it's easy to, amend that number to something lower. That's fine.
Yeah, so that would be something like about 3 times the average home size in Manchester.
If they could afford 2,100 square foot, a 21,000 square foot home, they can afford the extra studies. 21-room house, yeah.
Currently, section 4.1 says 2 or more dwellings or a commercial or industrial exceeding 7,500 square feet or sewer above 2,000 gallons. So we need to review section 4.1 and see if that's what we wanted to say.
If that's not already amended, Peter. Thanks, Jeff. And Ron, I neglected you, and you've taken your hand down. You've probably given up in discouragement, but please speak up if you have something.
Well, I was just wondering if we would want these regs reviewed by engineers, peer reviewed by engineer before going to a public hearing. It sounds like it was written by a lawyer and reviewed by a hydrologist. Just wondering if there should be any engineering review on the regs. And are there existing regs already?
Well, the town has Title V responsibility for smaller septic systems of all kinds.
But I mean, are these what the Board of Health is proposing? These are new?
In a number of respects, I think that's right, both in terms of covering and identifying, singling out larger projects, hopefully whether they're residential or commercial, and in protecting potential sources of water. I'm sure there's some other things that are really novel from our standpoint, if not from other towns.
We currently retain a firm, an engineering firm, who handles all of our septic reviews. They are also certified to handle the water end of it. And we've asked them to review it. And we would also have the town attorney review it before we even sent it to this state person. And then after that, to the town officials. So it would be legally, technically sound.
Okay. And our DPW, would they weigh in on this at all? Or?
I believe Chuck just has, although he couldn't attend tonight. He sent an email just a little while ago.
Okay, thanks.
I won't attempt to summarize it. Other comments? And if not, can I hear any opinions on my question about whether a vote sense of the task force is appropriate at this stage, or whether we should just continue with individual recommendations to Peter and the Board of Health. Randy?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I read through the whole document pretty much, and it looks pretty comprehensive on a lot of levels. But one thing that I found was it didn't include a lot of things on best practices, you know, once the development, you know, was approved. Like, you know, for instance, things like, you know, you can't build something that, you know, has a floor drain that's open and is, you know, leaching into the groundwater. So that was just a couple of things I noted in the document. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Jeff?
I'd propose that we give it a month, send it to the Mass DEP person and get Peter's, from that engineering firm that he referred to, their review, and come back to vote on that amended document in a month or two.
Okay, may I ask, is there general agreement with that? Someone want to make a counter proposal?
I'll voice agreement with that. I think it's a good idea. I think especially given that we have some members who have expressed some reservations, it'd be nice to have them here in person to talk about it too. But I think this can keep momentum going with the Board of Health and give us one more look as things get revised.
Okay, and Peter, do you think you'll be able to get over those? You probably don't know how long the DEP is going to take. There seem to be, most of them, quite overworked right now. But
yeah, I think they're kind of overloaded. If you will document all of the comments that you've received, that we can include as edits to the existing document, I will send it to the firm that we have retained, the engineering firm, for their review, and ask them that this complies with all of the existing state regulations and is practical. You know, we don't want anything that's ridiculous. At that point, how long with that certification, if you will, or with that backing, I'm not so sure how long the board would want to wait for us to further push it along. We can certainly get it into the DEP, but again, my understanding is both the Department of Public Health and the DEP are currently overwhelmed, and there's long lead times. We can set a deadline if that makes everyone feel comfortable, that we'll submit it, and if we don't hear back within X number of days, then we'll act on it on our own. There is a lot of resistance to continually extending the deadline for a vote and a discussion.
Yes, I understand that. And with that in mind, I would think that in a month's time, it would be appropriate for this group to vote on whether we would like you to keep the brakes on and not proceed while we continue to do our work. Because barring that, I think, you know, we've already made contributions. We're beginning now at this meeting to get good traction in discussing those contributions. If we do that once or twice more, we ought to be ready to say, go do what you, follow the direction you're headed, Board of Health, or please stop.
So can I ask you to get me all of the
Sue, can you and I work on that tomorrow? And who else would like to lend a hand in that synthesis process? Anybody from Quality and Contaminants? Gordon, I don't want to put you on the spot here.
Everybody else on the team wants to help out.
How about I leave it to you to find the person most likely to contribute,
sure,
and have them get in touch with me and Sue in the morning.
Okay.
Thanks.
Would you want to pass it by Scott also?
I'd love to. Scott, is your schedule open in the next?
Yeah, I can look at this over the next week and get you some updated comments.
Good.
Suggestions.
Okay, well,
sure.
It's just taken better than 40 minutes, but I think it was worth 40 minutes. And I thank you all for that. Randy, you want the last word on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think it might be worth starting the conversation with the DEP person, not necessarily waiting until you have every last piece of information there. It might facilitate, you know, the whole process for you.
I think that's prudent, and it parallels advice I've been given about DEP and Department of Conservation Services in the last, on 2 other matters in the last couple of weeks. They are just understaffed, overloaded, and so it's important to kind of get in the queue. Okay, the next subject is an update on the Tobacco Road paving project. I'd like to expand that slightly. It's not the road itself, but to include discussion of that development that Hamilton is considering approving, 50 to 60 luxury units targeted at seniors at the end of Tobacco where it meets Route 22. And I know, Scott, you have taken a look at that. And I wonder if you could say a few words about that as well as paving.
Sure. Steve, I do have, I could share my screen and just show a couple images that I included in the draft letter.
Make sure
if that's okay. Hope you enable me now. Okay. And gosh, I should make sure. Let's see. Can you see my screen there? It's a letter with my signature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I did take a look at this project, and I've actually drafted a letter that I provided to Steve, and I can kind of walk you through that. And this might be a letter, if you agree, that could be provided to the town of Hamilton as part of the permitting process, but I would clearly leave that up to you. And instead of walking you through the language, let me just go to my figures, because I think those will be easier. So what I did is I looked at the project location. And this is a map that we looked at last month with some added notations and arrows. So if you can see my cursor, his round pond down here, the Beck Pond, which is located up to the northwest. From some of the studies that were provided me by the DPW, there's probably a pretty good connection between Beck Pond and Round Pond via groundwater. And of course, we have the Round Pond well field here, adjacent to Round Pond. That, according to the data I reviewed, and it makes sense, we'll be pulling water from Beck Pond and Round Pond. So that connection, I think, is pretty solid. This map is part of a portion of the Hamilton Groundwater Protection District, and they've shaded this in the hatched area here as what they're calling the Groundwater Protection District. And in fact, within this area, I've drawn an arrow, and I'll show you a close-up. There's a stream that flows. The project site, the 133 Essex Street project, is in this area right here, where and the actual discharge of the wastewater is more or less in this location. I should also identify this dashed line is a surface watershed line, suggesting that everything inside of that flows this direction. Everything on this side over here flows more northwest. So I kind of view this as the contributing area of anything that could get into Beck Pond and then by association into the Round Pond wells or Round Pond. So my first assessment is I believe this site is hydrologically connected and contributory to the Manchester water supply system. But as we talked last month, this is not recognized in the current watershed map that was drafted in 1990. So I think this, to me, when I started looking at this kind of underscores what we talked about last month, that yes, we probably need to revisit and revise the protection areas for these water supplies. And I would view that, according to the information that Hamilton's put together and what I've read so far, this area where the project site is looks though it does contribute to this water supply system. Here is a close-up. This is actually from a U.S. Geological Survey site called StreamStats. So here's just for orientation. Here's Beck Pond again, and this again where I'm showing my cursor is the approximate project site. I think it's bounded by Tobacco Road and his Essex Street here for orientation. So as you'll see in a minute, their site plans show a wetland system right here. And this one, the USGS, which is, I think it's probably regarded as the world's expert on mapping water resources. They do a pretty darn good job. Shows a tributary coming in here to a stream that then discharges directly into Beck's Pond. So in my view, this kind of, again, is reinforcement of that hydrologic connection. Here is the site plan. I think I had two of them here. I'll start with this one. This shows the entire site. And again, you can see, I think Tobacco Road is over here, if I get that right, coming in here. And then this is Essex. So this is the development, but you can see they've got their septic system, and I've highlighted it here off to the left. And you can see this wetland system. And it actually, if you look carefully, and I do have a blow up, might as well go to that now. Here's the septic system again. From their site plan, it looks as though groundwater flowed from this, it's about 100 feet from that septic system to this wetland. In fact, they've cited exactly, I think a little more than 100 feet to keep out of wetland jurisdiction from the wetland, but it does appear, and you can see right here, there's a demarcation. And again, this is on the applicant's plans that go across this road into this wetland. And then this wetland, I've added some arrows because this system is exactly this system. This is the tributary through the wetland, and this is the stream. They don't show the streams on their plan. They just show them as wetlands. And in my experience, this is pretty common, and always one of my first comments when I'm reviewing wetlands, because they typically identify the bordering vegetated wetlands, but they may not identify the streams, which is also a wetland resource area. So I'm kind of inferring that here, but I think with some pretty good backup. So what I did, and I'll go back to my letter here and just show you a couple of excerpts, and that is, I'll start with this number 2 here. The proposed wastewater discharge is 7,500 gallons per day at that site I just showed you. And I do believe it's connected to, via the small stream to Beck Pond, which I just showed you those figures. Now Hamilton has a groundwater protection district bylaw, and I understand that they've made efforts to get this out of the district, but we can go back to that map and look at it in a second, because I think whether or not it's in the demarked district, it's clearly within the watershed to the district, meaning the water gets there. And if our concern is not so much the letters and what's in the regulations, but is it a threat? Will the water go that direction? I think the answer is yes. And the general area is marked as a groundwater protection district. And within that, within the Hamilton bylaw, they have a density limit of 1 dwelling per 80,000 square feet. This is quite common in other communities I've worked in. I'm working in Duxbury right now. They have 65,000 square feet per dwelling as a water protection mechanism. This generally roots from something called nitrogen loading analyses, which I've been quite involved in for a long time with the state. So many communities have adopted these lower density provisions to protect water. So, and it's quite clear when you read the preamble of their regulations that that's why they put this in place. I've actually included a little citation here from, or an actual copy of part of their regulation. And you can see here's the 80,000 square feet. They do say if any lot 1/3 or more is within the district, then it is within the district. I'm not sure they even meet that 1/3, but again, I'm just looking at this hydrologically. I think it's pretty fair to say from what I've already told you that it does contribute. So given that, I just did a couple of calculations to see if they meet this 1 dwelling per 80,000 square feet. So the project is 50 residential units, and there's a little more than 16 acres of upland. And when you do these calculations, you only count the upland, not the wetland, because wetlands don't provide any recharge for the groundwater, so they really don't provide any dilution. So the calculation comes out to 14,000 and change square feet per house rather than the 80,000. So clearly they're much more dense than the groundwater protection district would allow. The factor is about 5.6 times. I then considered the fact that they are proposing an alternative septic technology that does remove some nitrogen. In fact, it takes us from 35 down to 19. That's a 46% reduction in nitrogen loading. However, as I state in point number 6, even if we account for that almost half reduction, you could say, okay, half of 5.6, roughly 46% of it comes out to a factor of 3 times. So even with their these so-called innovative alternative septic systems, they do in fact reduce some nitrogen, but not a lot. I still think they're in excess of their own density requirements within that groundwater protection district. And as I note here, and as I think everybody here knows, because we've been talking about, there's a lot more to wastewater than just nitrates. There's these PFAS that's showing up in wastewater. There's other contaminants. So where I end up on this is my sense would be, having looked at this and also in concert with the work I've been doing recently, looking at, where does the water really come from that gets into the Manchester water supply? It strikes me that this project warrants a little bit closer look. So I'm recommending a hydrogeologic investigation, much like, I might add, much like the one we were just talking about in the health regulation that's being considered by the town of Manchester. So these would be my comments on the project. I recognize that they've made an effort. Somebody, I think, emailed today that they've avoided the 1/3 within the GPOD district. That they're trying to get around this, I think, and I understand why they want to do that, because they don't want to be regulated any more than they have to be. But I'm looking at it from more of a scientific standpoint. A, is it upstream of our water supply? And I think the answer is yes. And then B, does it meet kind of density requirements that one would apply in these sensitive areas? And I think the answer to that is no. So those are my suggested comments, and I'll leave it at that, Steve, and see if people have questions.
Thank you, Scott.
And I'll leave this up for a minute in case people have questions about the maps.
Good. Let's hear questions. Go ahead and speak up. I can't see all the faces, so you don't need to raise your hand.
But I have a question. This is Sue Brown.
Go ahead, Sue.
In that first graphic that you showed, the hatched area, that is showing what they currently have as their overlay district boundaries. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And so what you're suggesting is that while that is their boundary, what you would recommend if you were in charge of things is a relook at that, and the boundary would be the larger dashed line that you're showing.
Yeah, and that's, I'm sorry, so go ahead.
No, so technically their regulations, they're meeting them, but if you said if they took a fresh look at it with this new boundary, then it wouldn't apply. Is that?
That's essentially correct, with just one clarification. That dash line is not my dash line. That is their dash line. Okay.
And it represents?
They're calling it, in fact, I don't have it here, but I could show you the whole, well, what it says is the watershed boundary.
Watershed boundary.
And that means, where the surface water flows. So they're saying, and by the way, I just received today the 1980, thank you, Ashley. I think researched this, and I have a copy of the 1985 report, which I got about 2 hours ago, right before a meeting that I just had before this one. So I have not read it yet, but I have a pretty general understanding of what was done here. These are typically what they do is these are probably the more permeable deposits that they mapped, and this is the watershed that flows into them, would be my guess. But again, it's their map, and what they're saying is this is their watershed boundary. So
got it, but not their district.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, part of their property clearly is within this GPOD district, but some is not. And as you saw in the letter, they have a provision that if 1/3 or more of the site falls within GPOD, then they have to meet the requirements. I haven't done a calculation if they meet the 1/3 or not, but somebody did write an email saying that they might be below that. Again, 1/3 to me is a little bit of an arbitrary number. And hydrologically, I think it all is included. So,
so just one more follow-up question.
Please.
So back to that, and you think that the reason that their overlay district didn't include that larger parcel may have been that the underlying deposits were maybe doing some infiltration, or do you, so that they weren't, it wasn't as critical an area, or do you think it had to do with topography that,
you know, the
were
only,
those
I
just
can just
topographical?
jump in. So the only answer I can give to that, honestly, is I don't know, because I haven't read the report yet.
Got
But
it,
I can only guess. And the other thing is, mapping at this scale we're seeing here is always, you always defer to local on-site conditions. And the septic system that we're talking about is all, I tried to draw this arrow almost
Sure.
to the exact, to as close as I could get it. So it's right here, because I believe this little circle here represents that wetland that we were looking at before. And so the soils where that septic system is, according to their site plan, are quite permeable. And that probably wasn't known when they did this mapping. So I guess another way of saying that is their own site investigations are, in fact, I think, suggesting that perhaps this deposit should have been drawn a little bit more over here by their own site information.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Good question. Thank you. Others? So I guess yes, go ahead.
Steve, Francis Badil here. As usual, Mr. Horsley presented brilliantly on the effects of that Chewbacca Woods project. Did I misunderstand? And I thought you were introducing the subject of paving Chewbacca Road.
Yes, I was.
Near to Gravelly Pond, and that was what we were going to discuss at that moment. But we're going to get to that, right?
We are, and I begged everybody's indulgence to expand it to include this project, because this is on a very short fuse. The Hamilton Planning Board has been wrestling with this largely on this question of what impact would this project have on contaminating drinking water through fracturing rock, because there's a lot of blasting, through runoff, through groundwater infiltration and movement. And this is, I think, the first opportunity we've had for Scott to really look closely at this, and now to look at the Aldrich report from 1985 as well. The two are obviously connected because this project becomes somewhat more attractive if people can drive right out the driveway, turn right, and in 5 minutes be on Route 128 down the newly paved Chewbacca Road. So there is a connection there. Other questions about this 133 Essex project and its potential impact on our water supply?
Yes, Steve, I have a question for Scott. So well presented information here. And so the drainage from their septic system affects us. Whether it affects us negatively or not, we don't know. You suggested a study. My question is, where are Hamilton's wells, and how does that drainage affect them? Because that's their primary motivation here.
Yeah. Well, I can answer that a little bit. This, I just to remind you, I am colorblind, so I may get things wrong here. This looks like a yellowish greenish color up here.
Right.
How am I doing, Steve?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So this is actually these yellowish. I don't know whether they're yellow or green, but those colors are the zone 2 areas to some of the wells, and the ones down here are the Manchester wells. But this one right here is to a Hamilton well. I forget which well it is. And I've just snipped.
School Street.
Thank you. I've just taken part of this plan. I could try to find the other one, but I suspect I have too much of a mess on my desktop right now to find it quickly. But this to answer your question, this area right here, which is pretty close to the site, and I believe the other thing that's interesting, by the way, is this is Essex Street right here. And you notice the coloring goes along the street. I haven't read Ashley's report, I'll call it yet, but back in the day, in the 80s, when we were pioneering this stuff, people deferred to roads in delineating these things, because obviously it's something you can find in the field. So I'm going to guess that that's not that accurate, because geology didn't follow roads, and roads don't usually follow geology. But that looks like that's what they did, is they drew a line along that road. I don't know if this is another road leading up this way. Or not, I don't know. But anyways, to answer your question, this is the Hamilton water supply. In fact, it looks like, to me, that the project is just barely outside the Hamilton area, but inside the Manchester area would be my assessment.
But that was an area that you indicated based on drainage is coming from another direction.
This area here?
That's draining in the arrows that you point.
To the east, right. This would be
right.
draining that way, right.
That's correct. And that is outside their septic system area.
That I don't know. I don't know.
Well, they don't know either. And
okay.
There has been another hydrological and geohydrological study preliminarily done by a group called Ransom Consulting from Maine. It's hired by the citizens group that is opposing this development. And their conclusion was that runoff from this site almost certainly enters the watershed to the north and could therefore affect the well, which is just outside the reach of this map segment that Scott is showing you. It's not very far north. It's just off School Street, kind of at the end of one of the little dead ends there in a wetland, which is hydrologically connected to wetlands off Essex Street. So the issue is the planning board is not, you wouldn't expect them to be equipped to handle questions of watershed and groundwater movement. And yet it falls on their shoulders in Hamilton to make this decision. Which is why I thought it might make sense to furnish them with Scott's letter, this letter we're reviewing. And I would love to hear some reactions to that suggestion.
Essentially, you might not be able to see that Ron Mastrogiacomo's hand is up.
Ah, thank you. Ron, fire away.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, a good report, but I'm wondering if we can ask for better engineered treatment, advanced treatment, rain gardens to help mitigate groundwater. Are these the type of things that we could, ask to try to protect ourselves now that we've pointed out there may be an issue here? And do we know what kind of treatment is proposed?
Yeah, if I may, Steve, yes, they did identify the treatment. I think it's the Presby system, which is one of...
It is a Presby system.
Which is one of, I don't know, about, I'm going to say half a dozen systems that have been approved by DEP that, in my view, marginally remove, in this case, about 45%, I guess 46% reduction, which maybe is more than marginal. I don't mean to undersell it, but they're at 7,500 gallons per day. If they were at 10,000 gallons per day, that would trigger what's called a groundwater discharge permit, and they would have to be 10 milligrams per liter or less. So, and it's very common for these developments to come in below that 10,000 gallon per day threshold, just because it's a lot less work, a lot less permitting, and a lot less costs. But I think, again, my view is, I mean, you're asking me to look at protection of your drinking water supply. I view this project in your watershed to your water supply, and a project of this magnitude, this density, which again exceeds their own density by a factor of somewhere between 3 and 6, according to their own bylaw. I think that's a very good suggestion. At a minimum, argue for the best available treatment, which would be a groundwater discharge permit at 10 milligrams per liter. It's going to cost them more money, but if they don't want to do that, again, my view would be they should at least justify it. And I've seen nothing, and I'm not saying I've seen everything because I haven't spent a lot of time reviewing this, but I've seen no studies that have been done showing nitrogen loading or anything like that. So I think that would be a good suggestion to ask them for the treatment at 10 milligrams per liter. But they're going to say that that's not required to do it by the state because they have to be 10,000 gallons per day. Right. Would be the likely response.
And Ron, you may be aware of this, but there are some Presby systems operating in Manchester. The ones I've seen are relatively new, and they've been installed primarily in the Gray Beach area off.
Yeah, I have one here at my house.
Okay, so you're familiar with it.
I'm very familiar with it. It's
the Presby claim is that you can drink the water that comes out of their system.
I don't think I'd go that far.
I'm not sure I would buy that either.
You know, but
yeah,
maybe.
Okay. Well, this letter doesn't take a position saying you can't build this thing. It simply says, before you make a decision, you really should do a competent hydrogeological study. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I have a question for Scott. In looking at the development that they're proposing, the 50 units, we brought up a comment that they were going to consider underground storage units. And that's very close to our water supply. Has any discussion taken place on underground storage tanks?
For fuel oil, Joe, you're talking about?
Yes.
I honestly don't know. I did not see that in the plans. I was really focusing on the wastewater. Maybe somebody else knows about that.
Joe, I attempted to confirm that because when you first suggested it, because you caught it some time ago. Yeah. Nobody in Hamilton could confirm it. At least nobody on the planning board could. Ashley?
Quick question for Scott on medications going through wastewater treatment plants. I'm not sure, Steve, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought this was targeted to older citizens. What are your thoughts on contamination to water supply from medications?
Well, as a resident of Cape Cod, where we have maybe a little bit older population, and finding the fact that we've been finding these pharmaceuticals in our drinking water supply down here, a study done by the gosh, I'm forgetting their name now, Silent Spring Institute. Yeah, Ashley, I think your question is right on that. Clearly, pharmaceuticals are being transported through wastewater unless they're doing high-level treatment, which this is not proposed. And if it is an older population, it probably has a somewhat disproportionate load of that. That's a good thought.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, thank you, Scott. Useful and right to the point as always. Now let me spend a moment on the paving project because there is some news for those of you who haven't heard. We've been awaiting the Hamilton Conservation Commission issuing its order of condition, actually an amended order of condition regarding paving Tobacco, that segment of Tobacco that's closest to Gravelly, exactly where it is, with some stormwater management and other features part of it. And they haven't done it yet. It's been 2.5 weeks, which is unusual, but it turns out that the reason they haven't done it is that, like most projects, this order of conditions was voted under both the Wetlands Protection Act at the state level and under the local Hamilton Wetlands Bylaw. However, the original order of conditions they issued 2.5 years ago expired after 1 year. So you can't amend an expired order. And I think they worked on potential fixes to that and came up saying, no, we can't fix it. So it turns out Hamilton's Concom will have to hear this issue once again with a brand new notice of intent, as though there had been none. I think it'll probably be the whole road, including repaving the paved section and paving all of the unpaved section in Hamilton. And essentially it's a chance for us as the primary abutter and the primary victim, shall we say, of runoff to have a say when they consider it. Which coincidentally is what I had asked them to do when they met on May 25th, but they saw some urgency and chose not to wait even 2 weeks. It turns out they're going to have to wait months, not weeks, but simply because they didn't extend their order of conditions. In the meantime, the state has what's called a MEPA review going on. And the purpose of a MEPA review is to pull together different and potentially conflicting regulatory efforts in the environmental area by the state. So there's a single reviewer there. And I took the liberty as a private citizen of writing up concerns that had occurred to me, and frankly, borrowing some that had occurred to Scott, and suggesting that the MEPA reviewer look at those. I'm happy to provide a copy of that to anybody who wants to look at it. But there obviously wasn't time for us to act as a formally as a group. And at the board of, the select board meeting 10 days ago, the decision was made to negotiate with the town at the select board level rather than doing anything more formal. Any questions about that paving status?
Yeah, I have a question.
The work can't proceed until the order of conditions is finalized at the town level.
All right.
Yes,
question, Steve. So how does that affect their bond financing?
Well, if it takes them, more than 2 months, according to what they've told us, in August, the whatever it is, the surety or the guarantee on the bond expires. And given what's been happening in the bond markets, it's pretty clear that whoever's the potential issuer is not going to want to stick with the original terms. So essentially, they'll have to go out for more financing.
All right. It seems to me that's an event that is pretty critical to all of this.
Exactly, and that's what drove their haste and sense of urgency at the Concom.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay. We had intended to talk about the flyer and community outreach and getting people to take the survey. And I'm going to pass over that unless someone has a desperate need to do it, particularly because I don't have a specific plan to get your reactions to yet. Postpone that to the next meeting. We also wanted to hear quick updates from Group 3 on climate change and Group 6 on town accountability. Tom Kehoe has begged forgiveness for having to miss this meeting, so we'll probably, unless someone else wants to step up, John or Peter, I think you're on that as well. But could I ask climate change to give us the sort of the 5-minute view of what you've been looking at, what you've been thinking? Does anybody know that they're on the climate change group?
Yeah, this is Ron.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ron.
And Mike's on, but I think Mike had trouble with audio, at least earlier. And Ann's on also. We don't have a formal report, but we have been looking at some underlying data. And one of the things that surprised us is that predictions are that total precipitation will actually increase modestly. So we're not looking at less incoming water, although anecdotally it will be bunchier. We haven't found a lot of good numbers on that, but more of a boom bust type cycle. And as toward the end of the century, they're predicting that we'll have virtually no snow. So even though our total precipitation is modestly increasing, the nature of it is changing. The other aspects we were looking at were sea level rise, increased flooding due to storm events. So far, we haven't really identified that as a threat to water supply, but certainly to critical infrastructure like the wastewater treatment.
Ron, can I ask, have you looked at saltwater infiltration as a potential problem for Manchester?
Yeah, we've talked about it, but our informal look at Gravelly, it's quite removed, and Lincoln Street well you know, I'm no expert on the hydrology, but it doesn't appear to be a severe threat. And I think perhaps Scott could help us a bit more with this aspect.
It's a good question. Yeah, it's kind of nightmarish to think of salt water traveling all the way up Sawmill Brook to the well.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not adjacent, but you know, the hydrology of it, could you get infiltration? That's, you know, I'm not prepared to answer that.
Good. Well, thanks. Keep on. Those sound like the right topics. Any questions or comments for group 3?
Yeah, sorry, Sue. I don't have my, okay, go ahead, Sue.
Sorry, just real quick. I'm wondering if the climate change discussion has also included the thoughts of drought and its potential impact on the water supply, because we have experienced a bit of a change and maybe trending that way as well.
I think qualitatively for sure. I mean, I think the thought is that, you know, as gravelly, you know, drops lower, you know, there's more concentrated contaminants. You know, so far I don't think we're thinking that we'll be, you know, below the intakes. However, you do get more concentrated contaminants, so that is a potential concern. You know, the long term, the over a year, it would seem that it would recharge based on prediction of total precipitation, but I think this boom bust is definitely a concern.
Question, Gordon?
Thanks. Yeah, I was just curious if in anything you've looked at, you've considered protecting other sources, future sources, and how future sources might be impacted as well by climate change. Particularly if you think about things like Lincoln Street Well, does any, I mean, you just said you don't know if it's threatened by sea level rise, but if you were to find that, where else do we look for other sources of water, and might any of those be impacted by climate change? I guess I'm just wondering if you've
we have not included that scope. I mean, we've mostly been looking at 2 existing water sources.
Okay.
Ron, this is Peter. I'm a member of that CREAT, C-R-E-A-T task force. Sue is the chairperson, and it's with the EPA and NOAA. And those are the exact topics that is in this panel discussion. And it's my understanding that there's a final report due out probably in a month that you may want to use as reference.
Yeah, that would be great. If you're able to send a link when it comes out, be appreciated.
I think Sue can do that, right, Sue?
I can absolutely do that. And we should probably, once we have the results of that, we should probably try to do some sort of presentation to all of you. You know, I don't know that you could just easily go into the create sort of software and figure it out necessarily. We haven't really done that yet. So we're still plugging in the data to get the output that we need. So my goal would be, when we're done with this, is to actually present something to all of you so that you know what we've been doing and what the output was.
Excellent. That should help. Ashley?
I was just saying thumbs up. Now I don't know how to put my thumb down.
Right. I can't tell the difference without putting on my reading glasses. That was a thumb up, wasn't it? Super. We all need to practice this. Good. Thanks for that report, Ron. So in hopes of winding up on time, let's confirm a next task force meeting 2 weeks from now, which would be June 29, Wednesday at 7 p.m. I should note that in addition to Tom, who's absent tonight, Helen Bethel is under the weather and sends her regrets. And I have a marvelous note from Chuck Dam, which I hope he doesn't mind my sharing. It says in essence that he had some surgery, day surgery today, and they've given him some terrific painkillers. So while he would love to have a narcotics-ridden debate with Peter Colarusso in front of all of us, he thought perhaps it should wait at least 2 weeks. So we wish him speedy healing too.
Steve, can I just interject for 1 second? Do you think that going forward we'll stick with this schedule? I know that some people have expressed a little bit of concern with the fact that we've been a little bit of a moving target from a scheduling perspective, but this seems like we've gotten into a groove and it seems to work pretty well with everybody, and we're getting, you know, quite a few attendees. Do you think this is what we should stick with? It's the opposite week from the ZBA meetings that are on Wednesdays, so I think we might have found a good spot if everybody agrees.
Yeah, it works for me, and I should fess up, but I don't expect we're going to try to meet every 2 weeks right straight through the summer, because I don't think we'll be able to maintain that pace. But personally, I like this time of meeting, and I think it's working in terms of attendance. So unless somebody has an objection, that would probably be someone who's not here. It's good to settle on the same time, same day, same station.
Steve, I would vote in favor of day and time. It works great for me.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Okay, we still have an update scheduled for the select board, tentatively the day after 4th of July. That would be Tuesday, the 5th. And I would be glad to hear from anyone who wants to volunteer to join me and Sue for that. Particularly team 2 or 4, I would think, contaminants or supplies. Because I think we could benefit from someone who's right on top of that stuff, and they could as well. But Sue and I will work up what we intend to do with them, and we'll review it with the task force in 2 weeks. Sue, have I overcommitted you, or can we handle that?
I think we can handle that, and I have
Good.
no choice now anyway, so there we go.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we also have minutes from June 1st. Are there any corrections or additions? So hearing none, I will move we accept the minutes of June 1st as written. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I hear Joe seconding. All those in favor indicate by waving, raising your hand, or thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye.
Look for the group.
Aye. Aye.
Good. As Alan Wilson would say, I have no doubt it will be. Excellent. Any other items not anticipated when the agenda was put together? Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time tonight, and hope you all enjoy some more beautiful summer days.
Steve, Francis Caudell has her hand up.
I see it now. Thank you, Francis.
I was voting yes.
Excellent. Thank you. We accept your vote. And with that, a motion to adjourn would be appropriate.
So moved, Steve.
I see it moved by John, seconded by Jeff. Without objection, it's approved. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.